two, one.
Hi, you're watching BloombergQuint, and we're discussing the US elections with the clear caveat that we don't have a declared winner as yet. The ballot counting is still underway, but it does look like the Biden Harris ticket is closer to winning than the incumbent candidate, President Trump, and his Vice President, Michael Pence, are at this point in time. Of course, we also do know that President Trump's campaign has initiated several legal cases ranging from issues with the way the ballots were unveiled to vote counting. We don't know what the success of those will be. But at this time, like I said, it's more likely that the US will have a President Biden very soon. To discuss what this election has meant, both for the US and the world, I'm joined now by Ian Bremmer, a political scientist, president and founder of Eurasia Group, a global political risk research and consulting firm, and someone, if you follow on Twitter, who's very candid with his views on what, not just this election is meant, but about politics and the global geopolitical order. Mr. Bremmer, thank you so much for your time today. What do you make of what this election has meant, both for the US and for the world?
Huge turnout. A lot of Americans really care, higher than we've seen in a century. It's great to see that. Also, the United States is an incredibly divided country, and perhaps more divided today than any other advanced industrial democracy in the world. And the fact that President Trump, he's going to lose. Biden will be the next president, but President Trump will not accept the legitimacy of the outcome, in my view. I'd be surprised if he offers a concession speech. And furthermore, I think that many of his supporters will believe that the election was stolen against him, that it's going to be rigged. And so the feeling of division in the United States is likely to only intensify on the back of this very hard-fought election. Add to that that we do not have a blue wave. Biden will have won by many millions of votes, a larger margin than Hillary Clinton lost by in 2016. But the Dems are very unlikely to take the Senate. They are losing seats in the House. And gridlock is something that frequently the markets like in the United States. And you've seen some of those moves in equities in the last 48 hours. But, the actual people of America need relief. They need support, those that are starting to default on their credit card bills, starting to be evicted from their apartments, and the ability to get significant stimulus through in a very tightly contested election with a Senate and that is not working in an alignment with this new president. Just the idea that you have a president that will have won by about 5 million votes and will not be able to move forward on any reforms that he personally wants to see is kind of unheard of in a democracy in the world today. And yet it's exactly what you're going to be seeing in the United States next year.
Mr. Bremmer, were you anticipating a blue wave?
I was anticipating a Biden win. I was also anticipating a contested outcome. You may remember from January of 2000, for the first time in the history of Eurasia Group, we were founded in 1998, we listed the United States domestically as the top risk of the year. Rigged, that was the name of the risk. The idea that the US election was going to be seen as illegitimate by the losing side. That was before the pandemic that we wrote about that. Of course, the pandemic has only intensified that because it makes the voting process itself more political. If you vote in person, you're more likely to support Trump. You vote in advance by mail, you're more likely to support Biden. The incredible divisiveness and the delegitimization of the election, the erosion of US political institutions, that is perhaps the most significant takeaway of the year and of the election.
But what does it say about the ability of political scientists like yourself to be able to read American society correctly if you were anticipating a Biden wave and that has clearly not come through? Is it that, it's been tougher and tougher to try and diagnose what's going on?
I want to be clear. I was not anticipating a Biden wave. I was
You were
anticipating
not.
Biden.
Oh, okay.
I was
sorry,
anticipating a Biden win.
Win. I'm sorry. I misheard you.
We will get a Biden win. But your question is real, because I don't think lessons have been learned in the last 4 years. I think that most people 4 years ago that were expecting a Hillary Clinton win, and by the way, 4 years ago, I did expect a Hillary Clinton win. I was surprised by the Trump win. But I think 4 years after, you have the establishment political class in the US on the left and on the right, but most of whom really don't like Trump as a human being, saying, well, I mean, now that we've had 4 years of Trump, obviously, I mean, the only people that would support Trump are racists. Obviously, everyone understands he's such a horrible president, they're going to vote him out. And they don't understand that deeply in the United States, there are a lot of people, and not just white people. There are a lot of Hispanics. There are a lot of blacks. There are a lot of Asians. There are Muslims. There are a lot of Americans who have been living in the United States, and they look at the political system and they say, those people will not help me. Those leaders, the media, the CEOs, the scientists, the doctors, the bankers, they will not help me. And I am not going to talk to them. I'm not going to support them. If the pollsters call me up, I'm not answering the phone, because I know those people have been lying to me for a long time. That's how you got Brexit. It's how you got the Gilets jaunes in France. But the United States, at least in Europe, in continental Europe, they're treating coronavirus as one thing, the whole continent. They've got a big problem. They're all trying to respond together. And indeed, you got 27 countries voting unanimously to support functionally a Marshall Plan that would redistribute wealth to the people that most needed it. In the United States, coronavirus has been politicized, vastly greater than we've seen in any other wealthy country in the world. And I think people are very, very angry about that. And that's why, even with 250,000 Americans dead, 10 million coronavirus cases, 100,000 yesterday, a new record for the United States, you still manage to see so many Americans coming out with record turnout and saying, I'm voting for that guy. And I think that people need to understand that what's happening in the United States is much deeper than the tweets that President Trump puts out every day.
And so you've spoken of how, because of the lack of a Senate majority, a narrowing win, in the lower house, all of this in numbers politically restricts a President Biden agenda, whether it's on climate or the stimulus plan or on healthcare or any of those things. But the very fact that people have misread what the public emotion is or the public sentiment is, does that also not serve as a huge encumbrance on whatever the political, ideological agenda of a President Biden may be?
Yeah, I think that a country that is this divided, with political institutions that have eroded along those divides, a media which plays almost exclusively to the political preference of their primary viewership, a social media which acts as a megaphone to exaggerate those differences. All of those things pull at the fabric of civil society in the United States. They make the average American no longer know what the country really stands for. And, keep in mind, I mean, I'm 50. My first trip outside the United States was in 1986 to the Soviet Union. And we beat the Soviets in the Cold War because our ideas were better, because our political system was aspirational, not just in the United States, but to all of the people in those former Soviet republics. In 2020, which is not so much later, it's not even been 30 years since the Soviet Union has collapsed, there's almost no one around the world that would look at the United States and say, I want my system to work like that. I mean, you might say that about Canada, about Germany, about the Nordics, maybe even Japan, but you wouldn't say that about the United States. And American exceptionalism as a concept is really defunct. Now, American power is not. The role of the American dollar is not. The role of the American tech companies, efficiency, market expertise, banking, all of those things, I mean, they're not going away. But there's something that is in a sense, more meaningful than that, more intangible than that, more human than that the United States did in the best of times represent and reflect a system that really engendered the aspirations of our collective humanity. And a lot of that is gone today. And I think that this election reflects that reality very, very well.
What does that then mean for countries like China? In America, that's more inward looking, that's less superpowerish, leaves large gaps open?
I mean, it certainly creates a lower common denominator globally. So, I mean, the idea that China doesn't respect human rights is harder to criticize collectively when the United States doesn't care as much, or when the United States itself. I mean, you had elections just the other day in Tanzania, and you had elections going on now in the Cote d'Ivoire. And I noted that our State Department was heavily criticizing both of those electoral processes for irregularities in the vote. Now, I mean, it's really hard to do that and not have people laugh at you when your own president is putting out, "Stop the vote, it's rigged." I mean, at the very least, we should probably, as Americans, suspend criticism of other countries' elections for a couple of years, maybe let Canada do it for a while we get our own house in order a little bit, right? So, I mean, clearly the Chinese like that because it means the Americans no longer are as capable of offering that kind of soft power criticism. But American hard power criticism, the Chinese pay attention. When we tell Huawei, which is the most important Chinese tech company, their national champion, that we are going to blow them up in terms of 5G, the Chinese pay attention because they don't have a semiconductor industry worth squat. And if they want to try to rebuild that, they're 15 years behind. And if we tell our allies, you better work with us and not with them, they're largely going to listen. And in India, I mean, Modi has been fine with Trump, just fine. And that's included on issues like 5G, on issues like TikTok, and issues like, Chinese applications, many of which have been banned by your government. So it's not to say that America's allies no longer care about the U.S. It's not to say that people aren't going to want to come to the United States to study, to invest, to be tourists. All of those things will continue to happen. But it's simply the fact that when we talk about things like democracy and the future of political systems and even rule of law and the economic order and capitalism and a social contract that, is seen as functional for the average citizen, there the United States is very deeply flawed today. And it does not appear to me that the new constellation of political actors that will come into power in 2021 are going to be in a position to address that very effectively.
So you, in a piece in the Times, likened the United States, or at least said that the United States is moving away from being a true functional representative democracy, like, for instance, Canada or Germany, towards a more hybrid political system, such as Hungary and Turkey. And that's a very disturbing comparison, given where Hungary and Turkey are right now. What does this tell us about what the next 5 years will be like?
Well, I want to make the point that there are so many people in the last few years that have made the argument that the United States is on the brink of revolution, that we're going to become a banana republic, that we're going to become an authoritarian state, that if we had reelected Trump, it was all over. Those were staggeringly and breathtakingly stupid takes, right? That is not happening. It's not remotely happening. But the divisions in the United States and the erosion of political institutions, which started well before Trump, but which accelerated under Trump. And I'm talking about the media, but I'm also talking about the election, the electoral process and procedures, which Trump is doing his best, even having now about to lose the election. He's still trying very hard to damage, disrupt, and delegitimize it. I'm talking about institutional corruption inside the civil service with political appointees that are effectively trying to self-regulate for special interests. I'm talking about the inability of the legislature to get legislation done. I'm talking about the president who functionally increasingly governs by executive order. So Trump, gets rid of what Obama did and Biden gets rid of what Trump did, but you don't actually see forward-looking strategic governance. I mean, all of these things over the decades actually do manage to erode the US political system. And so if you want to think about the US political system in a spectrum where Canada's on one side and China and Russia are on the other, and Turkey's in the middle, you would have to argue that the United States is not in the same place as Canada today. It's just not. It's eroded, it's slipped, and it's continuing to slip. And I think that's going to continue to happen over the coming years.
What does that mean for countries like India? You spoke of Prime Minister Modi's relationship, camaraderie with President Trump. I don't know if that will change if Joe Biden were to become president, though the broader architecture of the India-US relationship is expected and anticipated to remain on the progressive course that it has been. But, you know, for countries like India, which are trying to fob off China in a very important border dispute at this point in time, an America that's not anywhere as strong as one had hoped it would be under a Democratic win. You've pointed out that, you know, the next 4 years are going to look more like the past 4 years than the past 50. What does that mean for countries like India?
Well, one, India is in a better position vis-a-vis the US than most, because one of the very few foreign policy areas that you have broad bipartisan agreement in the United States is that the US should take a more assertive position vis-a-vis China. And that makes India more attractive geopolitically, and your own prime minister is very oriented towards that. So I do think that the efforts of the US government to put together a quad with security dynamics that is seen as a counterbalance to China, that's going to continue under Biden. I also think that the election of the first vice president of South Asian descent, Kamala Harris, is something that will be very important for the Indian diaspora, which has both political but also a great deal of economic influence in the United States. So I think India is one of the few countries in the world that's actually stood in pretty good shape, irrespective of what happened in the election in the United States. But more broadly, the idea that the United States is going to be the sheriff for the world militarily, provide security, the idea that the Americans are going to be the architect of global trade, or somehow the cheerleader of global values. I mean, those things are really rear view mirror realities for now.
Ms. Bremmer, if President Trump does lose, as seems to be the case right now, his style of functioning, his style of administration and governance, many have described was closer to an autocracy, very muscular. You can find different ways to put it. And therefore that emboldened many other such similar leaders across the world. Now, legal challenges, does that change the way other countries will look at some of their leadership or the legitimacy those?
I'm not so sure. Like Brazil, which is a robust democracy and the largest economy in South America, and Bolsonaro won, and he's very close to Trump. And so the U.S.-Brazil relationship will not be what it was if and as Biden becomes president. But Bolsonaro's approval ratings have relatively little to do with the United States. They have a lot more to do with how the Brazilian people perceive the economy and their security and corruption and the opposition to entrenched establishment corruption for many decades in Brazil. In Mexico, very close to the United States, the U.S. economy is dominant for Mexico. López Obrador, who is on the exact opposite side of the political spectrum from Trump, but his approval ratings have been very high through the Trump administration. And because López Obrador knows that the U.S. is incredibly important for Mexico, he's done his best not to antagonize the U.S., having nothing to do with Trump, having everything to do with understanding the balance of power between those countries. So you can overstate, at least in the near term, the importance of these ideological leanings, when the reality is the United States is still by far the most powerful country in the world. And in many ways, the coronavirus crisis, which has accelerated the disruptive nature of technology, where the Americans dominate compared to its allies around the world, those asymmetries have actually expanded.
Okay, my final question then to you is this. There are people talking about, Donald Trump running for presidency 5 years from now, if he doesn't win this time around. I want to spin that question around a little bit and ask you whether the Republican Party is going to be able to separate itself out from this giant following that Donald Trump has built, or will he continue to be at the very center of their politics for a considerable period of time from here on?
I think Trumpism is going to be very powerful. I mean, he is by far the loudest figure in the party. He is oriented towards his brand and the media. He will certainly create some kind of media organization with his kids. They themselves have become media celebrities. Some of the Republicans you would expect to do best in 2024 are very aligned with him. Senator Tom Cotton, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. I would not include Nikki Haley in that group, by the way. I consider her more of a centrist. But there's also the real possibility that Trump ends up in jail. And it is harder to run your party from a prison cell. I'm not even sure he'll be allowed to tweet regularly. And I mean, you can pardon Trump for crimes on the federal level, which will be an interesting question going forward if Trump tries to pardon himself, or if he decides to resign. Pence becomes president for a brief period of time. Pence can pardon him, but you can't pardon state crimes in New York. And there are a lot of those that are going to proceed. So I think that's an open question too. There is, and I mean, right now everyone is still in the midst of counting the votes and the response, but the knock-on effects of 4 years of a president that has done as many things that are beyond the pale in the American system that Trump has been able to get away with. Let's remember, Trump has been impeached. And in two presidential debates, the word impeachment was not uttered, not once, which is astonishing. I promise you that all of the alleged crimes that Trump has committed over the course of his presidency and for decades before that, all of this is coming out in investigations going forward. There is no deal that is about to be cut with this president. And so to the extent that Trump wants to continue to be the dominant figure in his party, he is going to have to contend with the reality that the Democrats out there feel very aggrieved about him. And that's going to be very interesting.
Ian Bremmer, thank you as always for your insights. I think the liberal world was hoping that a Joe Biden presidency would give them some more oxygen. And I wonder whether the slim majority and everything that's come with it actually does achieve that. Thank you very much for your thoughts this evening and for joining us here on Bloomberg.
Okay. Talk to you soon, Managa. Thanks.
Thank you.
Be good. That's fun. Let us know when it comes out. Okay.
Well, this was live, so it's already out.
Oh.